Hey, what's going on, you guys? Welcome to the video for Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree. My name is Ventus SGN. In this Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree build video guide, I'm going to give you two updated builds for the Nagakiba katana. The Nagakiba katana is a base game katana that is almost as big as a great katana from the DLC, but keeps the katana class so you can dual wield it with normal katanas. The Nagakiba is a basic sword that can be applied with Ashes of War and has a stat requirement of 18 strength, 22 dex. It also has a passive blood loss buildup of 45. With the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, a few new items and abilities were added to the game that increases the damage potential of the Nagakiba, and in this video, I'm going to show you two brain dead easy but powerful and fun builds to try out. But quickly before that, if you're new here, do me a favor and sub to the channel with Elden Ring and turn on all notifications so you don't miss an upload or a live stream. Thank you. Alright, so equipment that I'm using for these builds are as follows. For the first build, the Nagakiba katana is applied with the Ash of War called Unsheathe, set to the Keen affinity. This gives it attribute scaling of E strength and A dexterity. The Unsheathed Ash of War is a base game skill that allows you to hold the sword in a sheath and unleash a super fast attack, be it a heavy attack or a light attack. You can move while holding the sheath. I have the Ash of War set to the Keen Affinity so I can use armament spells that I will talk about in just a second. Other equipment for this build are the Dragon Communion Seal and the Uchigatana Katana with the Ash of War for Seppuku set to the Blood Affinity. The armor I'm wearing for this build is the full Rakshasa set, a DLC armor that increases your damage output but also increases the damage that you take. As an option for this build, you could choose to use the White Mask Helm, an item that increases attack power when blood loss is in the vicinity. This gives you a boost in power if you choose to use the Seppuku Ash of War on the Uchigatana before a boss fight. Talisman for this version of the build are the Shard of Alexander to greatly boost the attack power of skills, the Blade of Mercy to raise attack power after critical hits, Rolana's Cameo to enhance attacks executed after maintaining the same stance for a certain period of time, and the Two-Handed Sword Talisman to enhance attacks with weapons held in two hands. If you choose to dual wield the Uchigatana with the Nagakiba, then substitute the Two-Handed Sword Talisman with the Rotten Wing Sword Insignia or the Lord of Blood's Exaltation. For the clips seen using this build, I used Nagakiba in two hands and only used the Two-Handed Sword Talisman. This is only because when testing the damage, I saw a huge difference in attack power using this specific talisman combination. When it comes to stat placement for this build is primarily a dex build with more emphasis on endurance than arcane. Dex for this build should be between 55 and 60, and endurance should be about the same. Vigor can be whatever you're comfortable with. I like to be able to tank a few hits so I never drop my vigor below 60. Mine doesn't need to be that high as the sheath skill only costs 10 FP for light attacks and 15 for heavy attacks. Strength should be at the minimum for the Nagakiba, which is 18. Intelligence can be at its lowest, but faith should be at 38 so you can use the incantation for Blessing of the Erdtree. And arcane needs to be at least 50 to help with that blood loss buildup. Incantations for this build are Blessing of the Erdtree for healing over time, Golden Vow for increased attack and defense, Flame Grant Me Strength for increased physical and fire affinity attack power, Black Flames Protection for physical damage negation, Protection of the Erdtree for affinity damage negation, and Blood Flame Blade, a spell that applies blood loss buildup in target's hit. Other attack incantations I use for this build are Giant's Flame Take D and Ancient Dragon's Lightning Strike just for zone clearing. For the Mixed Wondrous Physic, use the Opaline Hard tier with the Spiked Crack tier. Now, I used the Opaline Hard tier to make up for the penalties for the Rakshasa armor, and the Spiked Crack tier increases charged attack power. When using this build in a boss fight, use all the buffs right before the fight, and specifically try and keep the Blood Flame incantation going on the Nagakiba. Seppuku on the offhand weapon is optional, but I personally didn't feel a need to use it on any of the boss fights using this specific build. If you can, use the Unsheathed Ash ability, but hold it before you attack the boss so you can get the attack buff from Rolana's Cameo. If you can get the heavy attack with the Unsheathed, that's huge because that skill takes chunks of health off of most bosses. Otherwise, use jumping heavy attacks or charged heavy attacks. Very rarely do I ever use light attacks anymore. My main goal in boss fights now is to drain a boss's poise meter and break their stance to get the critical attack. Charged heavies with this build takes chunks off of a boss's poise meter, and you can do them from a fairly safe distance because of the Nagakiba's poking range. Once you break a boss's stance and get the critical attack, the Blade of Mercy Talisman will activate and you'll get a 20% attack buff for the next 20 seconds. Once you have this buff, find a way to use Rolana's cameo and hold that Unsheathe ability so you gain the attack buff from that as well, and then use the Unsheathe heavy attack and destroy that boss's health bar. If you can't get Rolana's buff, using a charge heavy attack will work just as well after getting the Blade of Mercy attack buff. Try this build out and let me know what you think. For the second build, use the Nagakiba with the Ash of War for Piercing Fang set to the Blood affinity. This gives the Nagakiba D-scaling in Strength and Arcane and B-scaling in Dexterity. The Ash of War Piercing Fang is a charging attack and as such has more than a couple of items that significantly increase the damage that you can do with it, making this a pretty broken Ash of War on the Nagakiba. Other equipment for this build are once again the Dragon Communion Seal and the Uchigatana Katana with the Seppuku Ash of War set to the Blood affinity. Now with this build, I've found it absolutely necessary before boss fights to actually use the Seppuku Ash of War to boost damage to get boss fights over with quickly. Armor for this build is the Rakshasa armor set, but this time I did choose to go with the white mask as the helm to get the power up from Blood Loss. Talismans for this build are the Lord of Blood's Exaltation to increase attack power when blood loss is in the vicinity, the Godfrey icon to enhance charge spells and skills, the Shard of Alexandria to boost the attack power of skills, and the Blade of Mercy to raise attack power after each critical hit. For the mixed physic, I used the Opaline Hard tier for the Rakshasa armor and the Stone Barb Crack tier to make stance breaking easier. Stat placement for this Nagakiba build slightly changes from the last one. This is primarily an endurance build for me with Dexterity and Arcane as backup dancers for a change. Now hear me out. With this build, I do more charge heavy attacks and regular heavy attacks than normal, and after testing, I realized that I just needed more stamina. The damage is going to be there with this build with all the modifiers through spells, physics, and talisman. The main goal of this build, once again, is to go after a boss's poise meter, and this build does it better than expected, especially if you have the stamina to keep up with the heavy attacks. So with that said, endurance is at a 60 for me with this build. Nothing too crazy, but more than is normally needed for any build. My mind is set to 55, but could probably be 45 to 50 because the Piercing Fang only really costs 16 FP, but I have the points, so I use them. Your strength, again, can be at the minimum for the weapon, which is 18, but your dexterity needs to be at least 55. Now, I feel like, based on all that I've learned on the game so far, 55 is the best all-around number for most stats when talking about soft and hard caps. Apparently, after 55, you start to lose any real benefits to character traits, though you do still get benefits, they're just not going to be that great. Intelligence should be at its lowest because this build uses no intelligence, but Faith needs to be at 38 to use the Blessing of the Erd Tree incantation for heals over time. Now, if the Blessing of the Erd Tree incantation is not that important to you, which honestly it doesn't really make or break anything in a boss fight, you can drop that down to 30 on your Faith. Arcane should be 50 or better. And I saved Vigor for last because you can honestly put whatever Vigor that you feel comfortable with. In a game like Elden Ring where you can learn boss attack patterns, it's easy to just not get hit a lot. I, however, am the king of all speds, and I tend to get hit a lot. So having a high vigor enough to take a hit or two means a lot for me when playing Elden Ring. Now, using this build in the boss fight is surprisingly easy, leaning towards cheesy. Basically, all you have to do is use the Piercing Fang Ash of War a lot. Now, what's good about this Ash of War is that it lunges you forward. And because you're using the Nagakiba Katana that has really good reach anyway, it makes it feel a little safer to attack. Now, a lot of the times, I just let a boss become occupied with my Spirit Ashes and just continuously lunge them from the back. This actually worked extremely well on Gaius, one of the most annoying boss fights in the game. So, before every fight, use all of the buffs and put the Seppuku Ash of War on the Uchigatana to trigger blood loss so you can get that boost in power from the White Mask and the Lord of Blood's Exaltation. When you get in with the boss, summon Spirit Ashes, and just to be safe, let the Spirit Ashes get the boss's attention first. However, if you're a crash dummy like me, you run straight at the boss and hit him with a Piercing Fang. Now, we can't see a boss's poise meter like a health bar, but it's there, just hidden. And I imagine that the Piercing Fang, coupled with the Stone Barb Crack tier, does a number on a boss's poise meter, because most bosses, 3 to 4 fangs, broke their stance. So the main goal of this build is to break a boss's stance just like the first build. Only this build has the added bonus of causing blood loss to build up a lot faster. After about 3 fangs, blood loss should occur on most bosses and they will take a huge chunk of damage. Around that time, they should be stamina broken as well. Once you break their stamina and get the crit attack off, you get that massive power up from the Blade of Mercy talisman. When you get the buff, wait a moment after the boss is recovering from the crit attack you just gave them, move slightly towards them, and then once you are moving into them to the point where your character is just running into them, charge the Piercing Fang again, and by the time you are forced to release it, it should be a guaranteed hit on most bosses. Failing that, you can always use just a charge heavy attack after waiting a couple of seconds. Now, I'm always going to be a fan of jumping heavy attacks in this game, so whenever you get a boss's back to you, like when it's occupied by your spirit ashes, hit it with those as much as possible, as jump heavy attacks still do a lot towards damaging a boss's poise meter. Fun fact, I was going to make this video without adding a second Gaius fight for this second build, but once I realized how powerful the Piercing Fang was and how effective it should be on Gaius, I was actually so curious that I went and fought him again, and everything that I imagined was actually true. This build was probably one of the top 3 best builds to use on Gaius. So try this build out and let me know what you think. Alright guys, and that's going to be it for this build video. If it was helpful, please don't leave without leaving a like. For more builds and guides, head to my channel and browse any one of my playlists for Elden Ring. My name is Ventus SG, and thank you guys so much for watching, and have a great rest of your day. Peace out.